future is now.
Really excited today on the Next Mapping vlog and blog to have Marc Porat. He was the star of the documentary General Magic and an incredible man. I just had to reach out to him and find out, the whole mindset behind the vision and the creativity and the direction of the products that you were creating before, the whole story of how it went. And we'll get into that in the interview. But Marc, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today around the General Magic movie, around your work, around the future. I'm truly grateful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So, Marc, for the benefit of our listeners, tell them a little bit about yourself, your background, how the General Magic documentary got to be, and then we'll go into some of the elements of that actual documentary that I noticed that I wanted us to talk about.
Great. So I think I'm known basically as someone who is in technology, is a visionary, but brings to it a passion that has to do with more than technology. It has to do with culture, society, politics, economics, and the impact on people. Mm. So how did I get started? I was sort of raised in revolutionary times in the United States, the 70s.
Yeah.
Environmentalism and feminism and counterculture and the Vietnam War even was raging, and I was always interested in disruption and revolution. Mm. And I think that's followed me, and that's been my arc my entire life.
Yes. So tell us about the whole role that you had in creating technology that was way ahead of its time, and that the timing didn't line up for what we had hoped would happen. So talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. And these things don't come out of nowhere. And I think that's something that your viewers, if they look deeply into themselves, they too have a story and a narrative and a beginning that's important. So in my case, I did my dissertation, my PhD at Stanford. It was on the information society.
Yes.
And it was an economic exploration. Where are we headed? In fact, it was about jobs, which is something of great interest to you.
Absolutely.
It was that the information worker, which is a phrase that I credited with coining, the information worker in information society became the largest group only in the 80s. Mm. So I worked on that. It was quite well received and cited. It's still being cited all over the place. And from there, I was recruited to the Aspen Institute, where I was recruited there, and I made a film, which I hosted and wrote, produced, called The Information Society. Mm-hmm. And there is the elaboration on where are we headed as a society? What does it mean to be driven by this thing called knowledge and information and so on? And that's where I went to Apple with a kind of an audacious statement, which is Apple's future is not computers.
That is an audacious statement.
It's audacious. And that caught the attention of the board of directors and the CEO and so on. Because I also came with the vision as to what it was. Mm-hmm. And took a couple of years. It took a book that I wrote inside Apple called Pocket Crystal, Whole Person Thinking. And basically what it said is the future, you'll recognize this as obvious. At that time, it wasn't so obvious. The future is very small, intimate, powerful, handheld things that would be with me all the time. Mm-hmm. Communication, the emails and telephone calls and things like that. So basic communication over the air. There was very little over the air at the time.
Yes.
I recall everything was landlines. And it would be because it was with me, it was everywhere, but it would also be able to send videos and be a video thing back and forth, which is what we're doing today.
Yes.
And it carried content, which is both publishing and commerce. So that was the environment that I felt I saw quite clearly.
Yes.
While I was at the Aspen Institute and made a film and so on, and brought that to Apple. And it was met with, I don't know about this. This sounds kind of crazy. Because the culture was all about the Mac. And still,
that wasn't Steve Jobs around the vision in this sort of the way you're thinking?
I wish. Steve had already been fired.
Ah, right. That's right. The timing. Yes.
He'd already been fired.
Yes.
He went off to actually build not little tiny things like smartphones, but gigantic things like big, powerful servers.
True. Yes.
And then he came back, and I knew him because the team around me was largely composed of people who had worked with Steve on the Mac.
Okay.
And so I got to know him a bit. And later, he actually told one of our key wizards, we call them, software wizards, head of engineering, because we felt ourselves to be magicians making magic.
Yes, that's right.
And he actually told him that a lot of what he saw when he came to visit us was quite influential in his own thinking when he began to develop the idea for the smartphone. So.
Yes. Fascinating. So I'm going to put on my reading glasses because I can't read what I've written here for more questions. But you said, you wrote a doctoral dissertation at Stanford called The Information Economy in 1977. What did you know then that we're living today as a society? Because I love how you preface this entire interview by saying we all have vision. We can all sort of see into the future. And I think that's true. I agree with you. And I think a lot of people don't trust the magic they have inside to see that.
That's right.
So for you, what are we living today that you saw back in 77?
Yeah. Well, in 76, actually, what it was about was proof in the economics and macroeconomics.
Yeah.
I won't talk about it very much because it's economics. The information workers, knowledge workers, will be the predominant occupation in America. That was not so at the time. We were very much had transitioned from agriculture to industry to services. Mm-hmm. And people were confused. Services are personal service, like you get in restaurants and elsewhere, but also knowledge-based. And to me, it was absolutely clear that it would be the information knowledge-based worker working with information machines in bureaucracies or in companies whose output was largely symbolic numbers and words. So a bank.
Yeah.
A bank doesn't manufacture shoes.
Yeah.
Whereas in those days, manufacturing was really still the driver of the U.S. economy.
Absolutely.
So that would not be so. It would be symbolic, which means education and learning and facility with using information machines. At that time, it was computer. Now it's little tiny objects. At that time, there were very few, if any, applications that were available to mere mortals like you and me.
Well, now look at what I've got on my wrist. It's everything I need is
there. And that was science fiction.
Yes.
And it was actually popular comic book science fiction, Dick Tracy.
Yes.
And that would all become commonplace.
Yeah.
It would become so commonplace that we would not even really comment on it very much.
Well, you saw that. I mean, you saw the future. So, I mean, I just find that, to me, with the work I do, I find that absolutely fascinating. So in the movie, it was evident that you had great people. I mean, that I got really inspired watching the documentary in the movie because I believe that the future is created by people who are engaged and passionate around something that ultimately changes the world. And this technology did and is changing the world.
Yes.
So what I wanted to ask you is, like, what were the leadership skills, the innovation skills? How did you get everybody so passionate? Because they were willing to do anything for that project. What was your approach? What did you do? Yeah.
So that moment when I saw that and was able to evangelize and spin out of Apple, it's not easy to do.
Absolutely not.
Never done a spin out.
Yeah.
The vision by then was so clear, was so hot and clear and bright, bright light, that all I needed really was some heat-seeking missiles, who could see that bright, hot light and just lock in on it. It turned out that I was, lots of people had this vision, this notion.
Yes.
This isn't something where I came down off the mountain and no one had seen this before. And so what it was people who were thought leaders and had actually done visionary things. For example, the original Mac team.
Yes.
Right? Who are all about passion and all about focus and all about driving things forward.
Yes.
They had already seen bits and pieces of this. And when it was crystallized, that was actually the name of the book I wrote, is Pocket Crystal. When it was crystallized, they said, that's it. And Andy Hertzfeld, who wrote much of the actual kernel of the Macintosh, in other words, the deepest software, said, that's it, I'm in it. And he called another one of his amazing wizard friends, Phil Atkinson, who said, I'm in. And so it was the vision and the articulation of it that connected with something that they already knew to be true.
Yes, that is an extremely profound statement. Yes.
And so I don't take credit in other than being the person who, kind of lit that torch and then held it brightly enough so people could come in. And then because of their stature and their brilliance and their notoriety, in those days, that was a long time ago, 1991, if you think about that, a long time ago. There were actually lists of the top programmers in the world, if you can imagine. A list. Who are the top programmers in the world? Because there weren't that many.
Right. Nowadays it would be yeah.
It would be a billion.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
If not a billion, on its way to a billion, because they teach you coding in school, and in any event, when you're playing around with this thing, you're actually coding. You don't even know it.
Right. Yes.
Anyway, so in those days, it was in the programmers were in hallowed places like IBM, and that's it. It wasn't for us. Well, they were wizards, and they were in the top 10. And when they joined, that attracted a whole raft of really interesting people who came. I met them. My job was to articulate the vision, and make it real. And I did so. That was my role as CEO. And also by then, the CEOs or the presidents or chairman of 3 big companies joined us as founding partners. Apple Computer, the CEO, Motorola, which at that time was making the little StarTAC, a little flip phone.
Yeah, the flip phones. Yep, that's right.
Flip phone, which is a kind of a great grandfather of what you're wearing on your wrist.
Right.
And I brought in the chairman CEO of that company, and then the president of Sony. And at the time, Sony was everything. So you would ask the question, how many Sony devices do you have in your house? Because it was 5 or 7. So the appearance of those 3 leaders in industry and the 3 wizards, or the 5 wizards that came along, geniuses that came along and joined us. Joanna Hoffman, who ran the marketing for the Mac, people like that, was like an explosion of interest. And within a few months, or certainly a year, we became known as that mysterious company that was the hottest place to work.
Right.
It was the place to work when you're in Silicon Valley.
Right. So I'm so inspired. I was so inspired when I saw General Magic, and I encourage everybody listening and watching, go see General Magic. It's inspiring because what it does is it also, for me, reaffirms that these ideas that change the world aren't necessarily attached to an individual. They're bigger than us.
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely. It's all evolutionary. It's just in a moment in time, someone pops up and does something, and then is credited with really what is a continuum, what is a river of innovation and good things. So the people are everything. Yeah. And they were self-motivated. They really did do the Apple T-shirt that said working 90 hours a week and loving it.
Yes.
I mean, they really lived that moment, and each one became the mentor or the source of passion to the next person.
Yes.
I was handed person to person to person.
Yes.
There's no way that Marc Porat, that I could have hired and turned on all those people. It was done by the culture itself.
Yeah, well, I think you're being a humble leader, and I actually really enjoy that because it's rare. And at the same time, and I know I can tell by your energy that you can go here that yes, it's a collective, it's a collaborative, but there are sparks of individuals who are almost like the Mission Impossible movie. There was like that fuse, right? And I feel that you did play that role of lighting that fuse for those other people to do what they did well.
I think so, and I think as role of CEO, my job was to keep everyone energized, because there are ups and lows to every organization, every enterprise, every effort. And my job was to keep people up and enlivened and bring in the money. We had to bring in a boatload of money because it was expensive to invent things that hadn't been invented yet.
So here's another question I had when I watched the documentary. Were you guys do you feel that you were the innovation lab for what
Yes.
became?
Yes.
That's what like when I watched it, I went, you know what? They were the innovation lab for what Apple eventually just took to market. That's
Exactly. We didn't know it.
Yeah.
But one of the people in the film, who was one of our engineers, she described this thing going on as a supernova.
Yes.
Now that after it didn't work, people from the company went off and did amazing things. I'll give you 4 examples. One of our junior engineers, a woman, went off and was recruited to become the chief technology officer of the United States of America, working for Barack Obama.
I saw that. That was phenomenal. Yes.
Good for her, Megan Smith.
Yes.
She was our child. She was our baby.
Yes.
And now she grew up to be the chief technology officer of this great country. More kind of vivid and dramatic. There were 2 engineers who sat about 10, 15 feet apart. So there's a cubicle over here.
Yep.
And then maybe over there's another cubicle just over there. Mm-hmm. One of them, Tony Fadell, went to Apple and was the key driver of the iOS, which is iPhone.
Yes.
And is credited with being, sort of actually the spark plug of them and the leader in that. The other engineer, Andy Rubin, went off to Google.
Yes.
And developed Android. And between Google, which is 80% of the world's phones, and Apple, which is 12% of the world's phones, that's 98% of all the phones in the world were created by 2 engineers who sat 10 or 15 feet apart working on a smartphone in 1992, 1993, 1994.
Isn't that?
That's how the world rolls.
That's just, yeah. So let's take a look at your crystal ball. Everybody has the ability to vision into the future. And what do you see? Where are we going? Like we got drone technology, AI, facial recognition, voice recognition. What do you see by 2030? Where do you see the next evolution of where we're going?
Yeah, I think I told you that my concern with revolutions had to do with people, society, culture, economics, politics.
Yes.
And before we jump into robots and artificial intelligence, there's an intermediate step which we're living in right now and failing in.
Okay, tell me.
Badly. And that's that the information society and smartphones and the cloud, which is also committed to us. It's very interesting. The cloud, has created social media.
Yes.
Social media is an amplifier, and like any amplifier, but technology is an amplifier.
Yes.
The wheel amplified our ability to push things and levers and steam engines. So this technology amplified the best and the worst in human traits.
Agreed.
Social media.
Agreed.
And so let's look at the best, and the best is creativity and connectedness and innovation and sense of global, perception. But the worst is known. I don't even have to go into it. The worst is the terrible aspects of social media, the worst aspects of people saying things that are hateful and lies.
Agreed.
And when I say hateful and lies, I'm not restricting it to any rank in society. You can be you can lie and
anybody
at the highest levels of society.
Agreed. Yes.
And they use that. And in one of the screenings, we did a lot of film festivals. Mm-hmm. I was asked about that. And the question was interesting. It was very pointed. It said, if you had known that your technology would be instrumental in creating the worst aspects of Facebook and Twitter and so on, would you have done it? Knowing the damage that it's now causing.
It's a great question.
And it's a great question. And I gave an answer. And I think that your audience might want to reflect on that question and give their own answer.
Well, it's something I reflect. Yes, and I reflect on this as well. And not that any one of us has any answer, but I will tell you from my perspective, if we take a macro look and step back and stand outside the planet and look at the planet and how we're evolving, I believe, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ken Wilber's work, Spiral Dynamics.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. So I believe we are evolving to the teal level. However, we're in that space right now where it's about human accountability to behavior.
Yes.
And so if you are saying hateful things, you are missing an evolutionary opportunity to leverage technology for good. And what I think is being really illuminated, and people like Oprah and Prince Harry and Prince William are now bringing awareness to this, is we have a whole bunch of people on this planet who are not mentally well. And that's creating this vitriol, because if I don't spend a lot of time on social media, even though I'm in business, I'm a self-employed, I spend time on spreading love and goodness. I do not spend time in going down those rabbit holes of where people have a lot of hateful things to say, because that's not helpful to my vibrational energy. And I don't want to participate at that level. It's not avoidance. It's that I choose not to engage with that. I feel like we're in a polarity situation right now, where we have an opportunity to help people see that hatefulness and vitriol is simply they need to point back to themselves and go, what's going on with me as an individual that I need to spread hate, right? I think there's a psychological opportunity there.
It's a lot harder to lift people to higher levels of ethics and morality.
Yeah.
The force, the energy to lift a society is much greater than the force of diminishing it and debasing it and damaging it. It just is. Human nature is amenable to violence and to all the things you mentioned.
Yep.
And it's hard to lift.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder that when there's an introduction of this incredibly powerful new tool, called cloud and computers and smartphones and so on, that both sides of the coin get exercised. And I think it's everyone's responsibility. And when I say that, usually when it's everyone's responsibility, then no one takes responsibility. But in this case, it truly is. It begins with, as you said, yourself, and then it goes to your children, and it goes to your workplace, and to perfect strangers. And so that's one thing. Now, to move on to where is it going?
Yeah.
I don't feel that I'm that qualified to talk about it. Mm. And the reason is that this vision of what we just discussed, it turns out, I think, in my life was a singularity. I think that was the peak moment in which I had something that was really clear and really turned out, I didn't know it, correct and profound. That time it was just an idea.
Yes, I understand.
So I can have opinions now, and I'll give you a couple, but they're secondhand, they're derivative.
I understand what you're saying. Yes.
They're not original. They're not something that I say, and I'm now going to devote my life and...
Yeah, no, I'm not expecting that. No, I'm just curious on your perspective. Yes.
So on a curiosity,
yeah.
The computing environment that we now live in, the computers as we know them and have been around since the beginning of Babbage's computers and doing the census and doing looms and weaving, it's all the same. It's zeros and ones. And that's changing underneath us as we speak. One of my very good friends, name is Jack Hidary, working on quantum computing and quantum information and communication and quantum sensing. I don't have the time to go into what that means, but let it be said that for a certain class of problems, quantum computing is billions of times more powerful than what we're doing now.
Yes.
For certain classes of computing. Now, unfortunately, we don't yet have the software to keep up with the physics and the math of quantum computing, but that's coming. And when that comes, we'll be able to do things that are unimaginable today.
Right.
We'll be able to ask questions about the origin of life and the origin of the cosmos, and do predictions of all kinds of things.
Yes.
From the emergence of cancer in one person to solutions and creations of molecules that we've never heard of. Mm-hmm. We'll be able to do that. But we'll also make it so that there's no cryptography that works for most of the world, unless you have one of these things.
Right.
What does that mean? How does an economy work? How do contracts work? How does anything work when there's zero privacy, when there's zero protection of your intellectual property and of encryption?
Yeah.
Well, that too will be solved. Well, all I gave you there was a flag that really serious people are working on this really serious question, both for the good and for the bad. So when you mentioned drones, I can spend just a few minutes. I have no particular understanding of them beyond what you do, but it's inevitable that once a technology comes out of the genie bottle, it will not be stuffed in. And that's the generic answer to your question, which is if we have drones today, there will be more. Yes. They will be smarter.
Yes.
They will fly higher. They will go deeper into the ocean.
They will
go
smaller.
faster on land.
Yeah.
They will go everywhere and do everything that is imaginable.
Yes.
Because that's where technology takes us. For good, you can imagine what the other word is. For bad. Yeah. And that's where drones are going. They're going there very quickly. Mm-hmm. So they'll be used to absolutely increase the food supply of the planet, maybe to the point where spoilage goes to zero and transportation and distribution is brilliant. And so there will be no hunger. Because today we're already making enough food for the planet.
Yes, agreed. Yes. Yeah.
And we will be able to predict weather and weather events. Good thing, because we have climate change, and we have a leader of this country who doesn't believe that. And climate change will wreak tremendous havoc and dislocation, so people will have to move from where they are. Not sure where you're sitting. Where are you sitting, actually?
Vancouver, Canada.
In Canada, and good. You might be exempt from some of it.
I'm not sure about that.
Organize your beach clothing, because it'll be a lot warmer up there.
Yes.
And we'll be able to model that with this amazing class of computers and do that. So there you are.
So let me ask you then, what advice would you give to leaders listening around innovation? Because what I'm seeing in Next Mapping when we're working with our clients is a lot of them are stuck with trying to let go of legacy systems, for example, technology, or letting go of traditional business approaches, whether that's business structure or dealing with people. What, from your experience and perspective, what do you think we can do better in regards to innovation as organizations and business leaders?
I'll start with the personal and then move to the more sort of generic. On a personal level, if you're a leader, it's an incredibly lonely place to be.
Yes.
You're surrounded by people, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. You'd think, my God, and you go everywhere, you jet everywhere, you go to conferences, you go to this, that, and the other, and you sit with very important people in your business or in other realms of society, and you're surrounded, you're inundated, you're going to parties, you're very lonely.
Yes.
And I think the leader who feels isolated and who can't exactly trust what's being said, mm-hmm. and knows that they have to make decisions mm-hmm. that are impactful with fractions of the information and insight that they like to have, mm-hmm. that is the state of being. You're not alone. That's what it feels like to be dealing with something that's fast moving and that's important.
Yes.
And so if you suffer silently, that's what it's about. And at the same time, you have to. And by the way, I'm talking about leaders at any level. It doesn't have to be the CEO.
I agree. Yeah, I understand.
It can be a team leader or a small team. Yeah. Yeah. It can be a general manager of this or leader. A leader is someone who has people who follow.
Yeah.
And it is incumbent upon the person to maintain a high degree of self-awareness and introspection and humanity. Mm-hmm. Even if you have to discipline people and push them and fire them, it takes self-awareness, it takes empathy, it takes all kinds of things to actually survive as a leader. Yeah. Otherwise, you burn up. Yeah. You just burn up and you become a shrivel and you get tossed away.
True.
So the first is a personal challenge. Mm-hmm. The second part of your question is that technology and technological advances take more time to happen than futurist forecasts. So in other words, if they say it'll happen within 2 years, well, it might take 12.
Right. Yeah.
I suffered from that myself. I said, we're ready for the smartphone, and we had to wait 17 years. Yeah. And that's true of it's true of autonomous vehicles. It's true of all kinds of
yes.
It's longer. Fusion is the classic joke. Right. Fusion energy will solve the world's energy problems because this cup of water I was just sipping from can power your city for 5 years.
Right.
It's always 30 years away. Well, it's been 30 years away for the last 50 years.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Yeah.
On the other hand, once it connects, it happens more quickly than anyone forecasts.
Right.
And that's, for example, the smartphone. The smartphone went from an oddity to people on subsistence. This is base of the pyramid. Dollar, a year are already beginning to get smart. They're not smart. to get mobile phones.
Yeah, yeah.
And certainly the next billion, if not the basic pyramid, the next layer of basic pyramid, they have it. They're getting it.
Yeah.
And that happened since 2007, 10, 12, very, very quickly in one generation.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
So the warning, parenthesis, threat to your leader listeners is, yes, you can take more time to contemplate, but do it actively. Don't contemplate by saying, mañana.
Right.
Do it today.
Yes.
Start thinking, start absorbing what it is and studying and learning today, because when it connects, it'll knock you out, it'll drown you.
Marc, you're saying the next mapping credo, which is the future is now. You've got to be thinking about the impact today, even though it could be a far off reality. It's about thinking about and mentally preparing and strategically preparing. So,
and that's hard because what you're saying in that credo is you have to stretch your intellectual awareness really far and collect information along the way. When being a leader is all about compression.
Yes.
You've got to make a decision in the next meeting, and you don't have enough information, and it's super hyper political, and people are not telling the truth. Make a decision.
Yeah.
Well, how are you going to then stretch yourself elegantly?
Yes.
Into the next 20, 30 years, and think about that when you're being hammered every day by.
I actually believe it's a bimodal skill that we're developing as humans. I really do. I believe we're upgrading the operating system to say there is the here and now and decisions, and keeping that multiple perspectives open to future. And to me, that's what you demonstrated in General Magic, is that you had that ability to see what you were able to mobilize a team locally and in the now, while seeing this great big impact on the future. That's what we're asking CEOs to do, and leaders, as you said.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So lastly, because I know your time is valuable and I'm really grateful for your spending the time with me, what are you doing now? And where did the General Magic experience take you in your work and life? Because it's just a fascinating journey. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I as you know from the film, and by the way, for your viewers, I don't mean to be overly promotional, but it is on iTunes.
Yes.
And many other places, Amazon, Prime. It's now playing on airplanes all over the place. If you're taking an airplane.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link below the video. I'll put the link.
So I won't. But that was, you'll see, was such a personally crushing event.
Yeah.
For me, that I had to step back.
Yeah.
And I was, our producer, Sarah Carew, said, "You've got to be vulnerable and tell that story. Mm-hmm. People want it, people need it, because people themselves feel the same thing, and it resonates with people.
Yeah.
No one has been immune from disappointments.
That's right.
And that's really what at least half the film is about, is what it feels like. Yeah. In any event, so I had to step back, and the next thing I stepped into was climate change. And I spent 10 years working on inventing various things that could mitigate climate change. With climate change, we get three choices. First of all, we have no planet B.
No.
So this is planet A.
That's well said.
And there is no planet B.
Yeah.
But secondly, there are only really three things we can do. We can, and you can think of it as the acronym SAM, S-A-M. Mm-hmm. We can either suffer, or we can adapt, or we can mitigate. So that's it. Those are the three choices. And I chose to mitigate, and invented a cement, for example, with others that had almost no CO2. And why that's important is because 6 or 7% of our climate change, greenhouse gases, is cement.
Really?
So we need to reinvent. Yeah, didn't know that.
Yeah,
so we need to reinvent almost everything that's causing greenhouse gases right now. And so that's what I spent 10, 12 years on. And then I was remarried, and now I have a 5-year-old daughter and twins who are 2 years old.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic.
So so that talk about reinvention. Yes. And I spend a lot of my time there, and I'm also building an executive or leadership retreat in downtown Napa.
Okay.
And it's for teams, small teams, who are entrepreneurial and revolutionary and innovative, to go do what we did at General Magic Open. Go there, disappear into this compound,
yes.
and invent something and solve something. So that's what I'm doing now.
That's fantastic. And thank you for telling me about the Napa opportunity, because I think a lot of leaders would be interested in participating in that for you know,
Good.
yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, they take their team, only their team. They go there and do their thing. It's very interesting and exciting to do. So
solve something. What I like about that, Marc, is, you know, you've got Peter Diamandis doing his, 10 times challenges and stuff. And I've attended Singularity and the Exponential Innovation Program, and it's all good, but it's really way out there.
Yes.
And I found myself, even me, who's somebody who likes to spend time in the future and in big thought, I found myself feeling almost disempowered because there wasn't what can I do with this now, right? That feeling.
One more thing about leaders, your audience.
Yeah.
Teams of 8-10 people, and usually 8 or 10 people run sort of everything that's in a small, medium-sized, and certainly large enterprise.
Yeah.
Small teams can become very dysfunctional, psychologically, very political. Ego, when I say ego, I simply mean that thing which is identity. I don't mean egotism.
Yeah, I understand.
That thing which is identity stands in the way of clarity.
Yeah.
You know, groupthink, which is an old term, but group dynamics.
Still relevant.
You need a group of really smart, well-intentioned people in the wrong direction. So one of the things that needs to happen is a leader needs to figure out how to dysfunctionalize their team. That's really hard, because now you're getting into the realm of, I hate to say it, but you're getting into the realm of psychology and psychiatry. And you weren't hired, Miss CEO or Mr. CEO to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. You were hired to run your company.
I believe that's the necessary skill needed. Absolutely. Yeah.
So you have to mask that in some other, you can't actually say, hi there, we're having an executive team meeting, and today I'll be your psychiatrist. That's probably not going to go over all I want. But in some sense, that's part of the half of the content of a retreat, an executive retreat, or of an executive team meeting, or of a board meeting, is sorting out the psychological dysfunction and getting to it.
Agreed.
And that's my interest at this time.
Oh, well, we're very aligned. Isn't that interesting that I reached out to you, because that's our work as well. And so I find a lot of the work I do with leaders, when we do our consulting and coaching, is helping them break down the, understanding the behaviors of people on the team and why they're behaving that way.
Yeah, that's
right. And how to develop that so that it's more functional versus dysfunctional. Is really the work that we do. So
one of the lines in the film, if I may just, I can't remember exactly the line, but you might, is that what it takes to take an idea and have it go, sort of escape Earth's gravity, is an enormous amount of stress, and there's no time for introspection.
Yeah.
For a leader.
Yeah.
There's no time, and also, in some sense, it's dangerous to be too introspective and begin to doubt yourself. You have to have a kind of a certainty and a clarity, even if you don't feel it.
Agreed. Yeah.
And that's the art of being a great leader.
Yeah. Thank you, Marc. This is just phenomenal wisdom. And I just was so impressed with your humbleness in the movie. Like, I just felt, you didn't have this, your identity wasn't threatened by the reality of what had happened. You saw the bigger beyond yourself. And that's what really inspired me, because that's true leadership. A true leader, it's not personal, it's beyond, it's the impact. And that's what you embodied. And that's why I was so eager to reach out to you for an interview. So thank you for your time.
Well,
The future is now.